Good evening. It is now 6:30, and I will call to order the Monday, July 10th, 2017 Burnsville Planning Commission. I'd like to thank all the commissioners for their time this evening and staff, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the council chambers if this is your first time. Our first item this evening is the adoption of our posted agenda. Commissioners, do you have any adjustments or changes to tonight's agenda? None from commissioners, staff?
None from staff.
None from commissioners, none from staff. Commissioners, I would stand for a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Benke,
Second.
second by Commissioner Walter. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay, and the motion carries. The second item this evening is our oath of office for a new planning commissioner. Ms. Garros will be executing the oath of office. Thank you, Ms. Garros.
We're very happy to have a new planning commissioner starting with us this evening. I know that I think that all of the commissioners have met Jenna, but we will swear her in and start to go. Just need you to raise your right hand and then repeat after me. I, Jenna Majorowicz.
I, Jenna Morovich,
Thank you, sorry about that. Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I support the Constitution of the United States
that I support the Constitution of the United States
and the state of Minnesota,
and the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully will discharge the duties
and faithfully will discharge the duties
as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission
as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission
of the city of Burnsville
of the city of Burnsville
in the county of Dakota
in the county of Dakota
and state of Minnesota
and state of Minnesota
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
You're in. Welcome.
That brings us to the third item this evening, and we do have, it's a bit of an administrative piece. Every year in July, there is an election of a new chair and a new vice chair for the Planning Commission. And so my tenure as the chair will come to end here in just a few minutes. And so we're going to open a discussion based around election of chair and vice chair. There'll be some nominations. We will then vote. And then we're going to quickly kind of shuffle some seats here, not to confuse you, so this typically doesn't happen. And then the new chairman this evening will take the agenda from item 4 going forward. Commissioners, discussion on tonight's election.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, it is my honor and privilege to nominate my esteemed colleague, Vince Workman, to be the chair of the Planning Commission for the next year.
We have a nomination on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Walter. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. The next step in our process would be that we would entertain nominations for the vice chair for the following year.
Mr. Chair, it would also be my honor and privilege to nominate Commissioner Walter as vice chair for the coming year.
I have a nomination on the floor. Do I have a second?
It's my honor to second that, Mr. Chair.
I have a second by Commissioner Singh. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. I will turn over the chair.
Thanks, Deb. Okay. This is unfamiliar territory for me on this side of the podium. Thank you, Commissioner Benke, Commissioner Bradrick, for your tenure in this chair and your leadership and guiding us over the last 2 terms. I've learned a lot from watching you and Commissioner Singh, and I appreciate your leadership. And welcome, Commissioner Jenna. I'm going to ask you to pronounce your name for me one time. Morovich. Welcome to the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll move to our first item, which is approval of the minutes of the June 12th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, do we have any changes to the minutes from that meeting? No changes, so I would entertain a motion for approval of the minutes from the June 12th meeting. I'm sorry. Staff, do we have any changes for minutes?
No changes.
Okay. I would,
Move to approve.
we have a motion, do we have a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, say nay.
Abstain.
Abstained, Commissioner Benke was not at that meeting. All right, and the minutes pass. Our next item is the application for Buck Hill Incorporated for a PUD amendment to allow temporary outdoor concerts and related events held outside of a permanent amphitheater located at 15400 Buck Hill Road. And Regina Dean will be presenting tonight.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Benke.
With my relationship with Buck Hill and with the adjacent townhome project, I will be recusing myself from the next two items.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dean.
Good evening, Chair, member of the commission. We do have Buck Hill in front of us tonight. The applicant is in the audience, Dave Solner, as well as a team of consultants, if there are any questions after I run through the presentation. Buck Hill is requesting a PUD amendment to allow temporary concerts at their facility. Buck Hill has been around for 60-plus years, started out as a ski hill, and throughout the years, throughout its history, has transformed to providing year-round ski and tubing, special events like 5K races and bike races, and at one point there was a Halloween special event approved throughout the PUD amendment. There's also been a sort of farmer's market, vendor market that had also been approved in the past. And then also historically, Buck Hill has requested the PUD amendment to allow vehicle storage on their site during off months when the ski hill was in use. So you'll see vehicle storage for neighboring dealerships storing vehicles there. The specific request does encompass their entire property, about 60 acres. The specific site is adjacent to 35W, just to the west. And further to the west, we have single-family R1 to the west, R3D to the south, which is a manufactured home community. And then to the north, we have townhomes, which are zoned R3B, planning and development. And I should point out, across the freeway, it's park and single-family residential. This gives you an overview of the site from an aerial perspective, again, showing the single-family townhomes and the adjacent freeway. I do want to point out the approximate location is indicated with a star of the proposed temporary outdoor concert stage, just to give you, again, some visual perspective. This is, again, just another visual perspective of the site, giving what we call a pictometry type view, or more of a street, sort of a street aerial / view of the site. And then the approximate stage area would be generally, if you can see where my arrow is, generally in this location. So to orient you, on the top of the page is 35W. North is on the left side of the page. South is on the right side. And then to the west, where the townhomes and single-family residential, again, on the bottom portion of the slide. So kind of flipped orientation with this plan view here. But I do want to point out where the proposed location of a temporary stage would be located, where the star is located. And then indicated in the red outline is the approximate viewing location of the concert stage. Concert stage would be pointed or faced to the northwest, and the concert viewers would be looking almost towards the freeway to view the concert. Buck Hill is proposing approximately 4 to 6 concerts per year with amplified music. We do anticipate that there could be up to 5,000 attendees, volunteers, employees, security. That 5,000 capacity, 5,000 attendee, et cetera, capacity, really corresponds with one, what Buck Hill can handle, but two, what is a trigger for an environmental impact worksheet, or assessment worksheet. So if attendees, employees, security, volunteers, if that exceeds 5,000 people, occupancy, then an EAW would be required, and that's a additional process. Buck Hill is proposing to use on-site parking that they have available, existing paved surface area, as well as temporary parking on unpaved surface adjacent to the south property line, as well as the adjacent to their, I would say, north of the concert viewing area. As part of their proposal, they're also working with neighboring property owners, such as Celebration Church in Lakeville, Burnsville Center, the Zombie Board Shop, to allow parking on off-site locations and shuttling service for their concert attendees, staff, et cetera. There is also a drop-off area that will be available for attendees should they have a parent or someone that wants to drop off an attendee, or for things like Uber or taxi service that would also be available. Buck Hill is requesting deviations from our city code. The 3 deviations that are requested are to park on unpaved surface. If you look at our city code, you're required to park on a paved surface. Staff does support this. We see that it's temporary, up to 6 times a year. It would also help alleviate additional shuttle service or additional off-site parking service. Buck Hill is also proposing a deviation to park closer than 30 feet to a property line. That's, again, a city code setback requirement. Staff does not support this. We suggest rearranging the parking, possibly moving it further from the property line to allow more of a buffer between the property lines. And then Buck Hill's also requesting a deviation from the noise levels. As part of the proposal, we, as staff, had requested a traffic study and a noise study. And the results of the noise study showed that the noise levels exceeded MPCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's noise standards. In our city code, we refer to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency noise standards. And so we're suggesting, well, one, staff doesn't support the request. We are suggesting in our recommendations that further noise analysis is done and mitigation is done so that those noise levels are within the reasonable standards set by the state law or state rules. We do see PUD benefits, planning and development benefits. One, Buck Hill's a regional and local attraction. They have been for almost 60 or about 60 years. There's certainly an economic benefit to that, not only to Buck Hill, but the community at large. I should point out that this specific request, this specific land use, would be allowed with conditional use permit approval. So it was at staff's direction that Buck Hill applied for a PUD amendment. One of the reasons is because there's already a planned unit development in existence, and that they're also requesting deviations from code. But again, it would be typically, as long as they meet the conditions in a conditional use permit, this would technically be allowed as long as they go through the process and mitigate if necessary. There are a number of recommendations, 12 to be exact. Staff does recommend approval of the proposal. I can certainly run through the specific conditions if you would like, Chair.
Maybe if you could just quickly, I mean, we don't have to go through every word of it, but just
Sure.
to kind of give us a quick mile-high view.
Okay, yep. Staff recommends approval of the proposal as long as the conditions of the previous PUDs are in full force and effect. That the new vehicle inventory that's stored on site, that is moved prior to any type of temporary outdoor concert. That the noise study, further noise study is completed and that they meet MPCA regulations and city code regulations. I should mention that it was highlighted by our police department that public safety is, of course, important. And so we want to make sure that that is available at the concert and with traffic circulation around the site. And so we're recommending that private security, public safety, EMS personnel are located at the event at the expense of Buck Hill. We're recommending that ticket sales be limited to pre-sale tickets of up to 4,500 tickets. And that essentially anything over the capacity of 4,999 would trigger a PUD amendment and a EAW. The number of concerts shall be limited to 6 per year. That music shall end by 9:30, and lighting associated with the concert shall conclude by 10 p.m. The applicant shall revise the site plan to meet the 30-foot setback on the north and south property lines. That 15 days prior to the concert, that Buck Hill shall provide proof that they still have access to those off-site parking spaces with, for example, Burnsville Center, the Celebration Church, the Zombie Board. And the occupancy shall be limited to the number of parking spaces available. One of the conditions in the traffic study mentions some pavement marking improvements to help with site circulation and access to and from. And that shall be installed prior to the first concert. And that temporary no parking signs be placed on nearby streets, and that shall be established by Buck Hill at the discretion of our Public Works Department and Police Department. So what that means is we don't necessarily want to post permanent no parking from a staff standpoint, but have that discretion available. It's possible that someone, for example, from a nearby townhome may have guests that want to visit and may want to park on a nearby street. So we don't want to necessarily limit public street parking because of that. I should mention, and maybe this is too late, but there was a neighborhood meeting that was hosted by Buck Hill. About 50 attendees were in attendance, and traffic was one of the concerns that was brought up. Traffic noise, trespassing onto neighboring property, litter, just general concerns. There were also positive comments as well regarding Buck Hill and being a good neighbor. So I didn't want to forget about that. With that, if you have any questions, like I said, the applicant is available. I can certainly highlight or run through any other types of questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Dean. Commissioners, do we have any questions for staff? Commissioner Walter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, I think you might have answered it. The deviation required for the parking setback from the property lines, that's on both the far south edge of the property and the north as well?
Correct.
And do I understand correctly that it's 20, or is it 19 feet on the south edge and 5 feet at the north? I just want to make sure I'm reading the maps correctly. Sorry, that
I
might be a little
think-
technical.
Yeah, I think it's about 20 feet maybe in the north and, 10 feet, 8 to 10 feet on the south. Let's see if I have. Just looking through my plan to see. I don't have that specific plan that shows the detail.
That's no problem. And then what, can I ask one more question about thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's about the noise study that's included, mentions of variance from the MPCA, but did I read the supporting information correctly that MPCA does not issue variances for that?
That's correct.
Just so I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, so I did reach out to the MPCA for clarification to see if a variance would be a process that Buck Hill could go through. And the reply from the staff member was that, no, they really don't have a variance type of process. And really, it would be an amendment to the state rules in order to allow that noise level to change. They do, it sounds like, make some exceptions for some venues or some activity to come into compliance, and their goal is to work with whatever the agency, whatever the property owner is to bring it closer to compliance. But no, there's not an actual variance process for someone to go through.
Thank you, Commissioner Walter. Is there any other question? Commissioner Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dean, I have a few issues here that I need help with so we can make an informed judgment when decision time comes. First of all, the setback required by code is 30 feet
That's
from the
correct.
property line. And the applicant is asking for how many feet?
Let's see. I don't have that specific number in my request. I'm trying to gauge from the plan that's on the PowerPoint. It appears, I'd say 8 to 10 feet at the closest point on the
Okay.
south side, so 22.
That works for me.
Okay,
That-
22
the-
feet.
The point is, what's the purpose of that 20 feet? So that our listening and viewing audience can understand why staff is not recommending a deviation.
Right. The parking, it's adjacent to residential, and so there's really no buffer, screening buffer provided on Buck Hill's site to accommodate for headlight screening. It could cause possible issues with it, cars being parked so close to a property line, possibly parking on nearby property could be a factor. So we want to make sure that we have a buffer.
And this is not only for Buck Hill, or for this application, this is citywide.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, that's my first point. I have questions about noise, but I will wait until the applicant is up. I have concerns about the parking, and I support staff that the applicant make arrangement for out of site parking as they are planning to do. My other concern, Ms. Dean, is regarding the safety and security of residents from that townhome area. One of the complaints they had, or one of the points they raised was, even now, as there are events at Buck Hill, people sometimes walk through their yards and at night, you don't know who these people are, and they have a right to be concerned for their security. So I would ask the applicant to comment on that, the safety and security of the people who live there. I think that's what I have for now until the applicant comes up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh. Any other questions for staff? I keep wanting to say Chair Bradrick, Commissioner Bradrick.
Chair Emeritus.
Thank you. Ms. Dean, specifically on point number 3, the further noise study, this is kind of new for us, so I want to just clarify a couple of things. A lot of our background mentioned that the noise study was done not including crowd noise. And so for a condition to talk about, and it's very specific, it says that they must make accommodations or conduct a separate study that simply meets the city code and the MPCA, but it doesn't, so does that mean that if it meets the city code and the MPCA plan, that it also will then include noise generated by the crowd? I was trying to understand where that falls.
So really, any noise created by activity occurring on Buck Hill should be included in the future noise study, amended noise study. We measure sound at the receiving land use. So whether it's amplified music or anything, it's just the noise created. And so that's the request, that any noise potential generated from the proposed concert and associated activity be included in any modeling.
So the final numbers that come back to staff would have to include, to be specific, would have to include noise generated from the crowd, anticipated noise from the crowd.
And in concert-related activity.
Okay. And I just want to, Chair, I have one additional question. I just want to clarify, our background was pretty specific from the standpoint that the MPCA does not grant variances. The city does have the ability to grant a variance, but then the city is solely responsible for any issues that come up if we, through land use application, allow, help me with that.
I don't think that we can vary from a state law, a state regulation. So it would be, if there's a complaint about noise, we would be responsible for enforcing it as a city.
Okay.
We can't vary from a state standard.
And then, Chair, I have one last question.
Floor is yours.
The number 12, the temporary parking was also, I know the whole application's kind of new, so we haven't worked with this in my tenure. So the intent of number 12 is that Buck Hill, hopefully a homeowners association would work with Mr. Albright and come up with where the temporary no parking signs would go, kind of by event. Because as you drive the area, it's kind of a mixed bag of Burnhaven Drive has parking, but then as you go around the corner and start to go towards the apartment complexes and the townhomes and past Gramercy, then you get into no parking already on both sides. So I would assume it would simply just be the one section there that we're looking at, that there'd be some flexibility and some decisions made as to where those signs would go?
And we don't call out specific in the condition nearby streets, so if this is approved, I think it might be a kind of wait and see approach on how parking does it spill out into the neighboring streets, does it not? And we can only go as far as city streets, we can't go into the townhome private streets or private parking. But again, I think it's kind of a wait and see at the discretion of the police and public works.
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted to write a condition that it's tailored to a specific street,
I wasn't looking for
Okay.
more conditions. I was just
Okay.
trying to understand and what the goal was of the current condition, so, okay. Chair, that's all questions I have at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner Broderick. Ms. Dean, I do have a couple of questions myself related to a couple of the conditions and the parking setbacks. When you were explaining the setbacks earlier with, as far as headlights and no buffering, were you referring to the northernmost part that runs where the tube hill is?
yeah. Primarily,
Or,
and maybe, it's hard to tell in the aerial photo. Hang on. This might give you a better perspective. So how they're showing the parking on the south side, it's really close to the adjacent mobile home community. And looking at the north, there is the buffer, so.
okay. And that
I
makes
apologize for
more
that.
sense on the south side, because on the north side, it's a giant hill with trees. So thank you for clarifying that. Number 8 of the conditions, music related to the temporary concert event shall conclude by 9:30. Is that city code 9:30, or is that specifically for this?
It's not a city code requirement. The city code requirement would be in relationship to the noise. So once you hit 10 PM, the acceptable noise levels drop significantly. And so we want to make sure that, that the activity related to any concert kind of dies down so that it's not disruptive.
Okay. And I guess what's kind of guiding that question, and you know, when we had the art and all that jazz festival in the heart of the city, and we had residents that were, I mean, right outside, and the perimeter was residential. I wasn't here when we dealt with that. I don't know if Commissioner Singh was, or if that even came through planning. It would be good to get some insight on how that was handled in with that much proximity to a concert from a residential standpoint. I don't know what time their music ended, but if we have information on that, Deb or anybody else, that would be helpful to know. And then I guess my other questions would be for the applicant. So if there's no other questions for staff,
I have one.
Commissioner Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dean, we talk about pre-sales of tickets to each event. And how many days prior to the actual event, Buck Hill has to inform the city?
15 days prior, in regards to the utilization of off-site parking, is what we're recommending as a condition. As far as actual sales, I don't have a specific condition
I
listed.
thought that in the background information, I read someplace that there was a time when the applicant has to inform the city. And I was going to question that. I think if we provide a condition or a requirement for the city, let's say 10 days prior to an event, to inform the city that they have 4,500 people will be there, including staff. I think we are limiting that the applicant, I don't know if that's consistent with other applications that we dealt with in the city, whereas the applicant has to inform the city of the number of tickets sold prior to the event. I mean, and we're asking them to do that, if that's the case.
And one of the reasons for that is we want to make sure that they're under their the threshold for an EAW. And so that would be a way for us to measure and for them to prove that they're not over that requirement. It is unique. This request is unique. We don't, it's not a request that you get every day on a property. So we did model some of this language after there was a proposed amphitheater at one time in the north part of the city. And so, which never occurred, but some of this language is modeled after that.
Thank you. I can understand the city's requirement to be vigilant and to make sure they don't oversell tickets and then you get into problems. But also, I wish to remind staff that Buck Hill has been a very good resident of the city, and they have done a good job in the past. And I don't know why we need that requirement. I'm not too supportive of that item, the requirement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh. Commissioner Bradrick.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Dean, you've mentioned an EAW several times. Why don't we explain real quickly to the audience and why going over 5,000 triggers an EAW and what an EAW is?
Right, so there are specific environmental thresholds that property owner can meet without having to do additional environmental review to check for impacts to the site and to essentially the neighboring community, our neighboring property, traffic, noise, environmental, natural resources. And so there's essentially a checklist you go through to determine if something requires additional environmental review. And so this would be a whole separate process that would require basically like months of work and analysis. And so as part of that, what comes out of it is, do certain things need to be highlighted as an environmental issue? Can things be mitigated? It's really just bringing out into the open what those impacts might be. Again, things like noise, traffic, effects on the environment. And so that 5,000, in this case, the specific language that does mention that anything over 5,000 does trigger that specific review, specific environmental review.
And that would be the threshold of 5,000 that would require that.
5,000.
I would, my assumption as I was reading the background, and I could have been wrong, the 15 days, I think, would give city staff some time to respond. There's probably a difference between a concert that only is going to have 500 people and a concert that's going to push 5,000 from a standpoint of the number of no parking signs, the sheer amount of EMS and police and fire that's going to take to maintain an event that's going to have 150 or 500 people versus an event that may have sold tickets of 4,000. Could that be a correct assumption? Okay.
Yep, I would agree.
Chair, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions for staff, I would like to invite the applicant to the podium, if that's okay. If you could just give us your name and address, and I don't know if you have a prepared statement or if you'd like to just respond to some questions first.
Again, my name is Dave Solner. I'm an Apple Valley resident, 5491 134th Street West in Apple Valley. And I don't have a prepared statement. I'd like to make a few comments and then I'll answer as many questions or concerns that you have. I'm a relatively new owner at Buck Hill. For the last 2 years, I've been proud to say I've been in co-ownership with my partner Don McClure, who's been here for 40 years. He is also here tonight, so a lot of the history of going back can be understood with Don here. I'm proud to be at Buck Hill, and what we're doing at Buck Hill is trying to create, again, a more sustainable year-round business. It's a beautiful amenity to the community, and for the 4 months during the winter when we operate, I think we do a great job, and I enjoy that aspect of it. But when it comes to the summer, there's a beautiful piece of land that we'd like to, again, continue to activate and have the community involved out there. And we think the concert series is just one of the steps that will engage the community and create an asset here for the community. In looking at some of the concerns that came up tonight, I'd like to talk about the parking. We do have our parking consultant here tonight, and our, I believe, Tim, yep, okay, and our sound study engineers, HDR, is also here tonight to answer any questions with respect to that. Parking is an issue at Buck Hill on our real busy days. We've been able to manage that in the winter with shuttle buses, and we feel that we're kind of getting caught up on this 5,000 number here. I think most of the concerts we're looking at are probably going to be on the larger size, 3,500 up to that 4,500, but I can see 2,000, 2,500 in that neighborhood. When we met with Regina, we just kind of talked about the capacity that we have at Buck Hill. We can handle a lot of people at Buck Hill during the winter. That's not the issue. We want to make it a nice venue. We don't want to overcrowd it. So what's the right number? And we kind of talked through that a little bit. So the other thing is, with respect to the parking on site, one of the temporary parking that we're looking at is in the outrun of what we use in the wintertime for our tubing areas. And I think that was brought up that side of the north side of the property, there's about a 60 to 70 foot hill up to the residents that live on the north side there. So we were trying to be efficient with the parking in that area. It's a fairly flat, large area, and try to be efficient with putting the temporary parking there. So we were up against, or roughly up against our property lines on the north side. The sound, I think we've talked a little bit about that tonight, and we did several sound studies and looking at different stage locations, and we came to the conclusion that what we're presenting tonight is kind of our preferred. It makes most sense from being able to manage the crowds from accessing off the parking, the hard surface, right into the controlled area, as well as utilizing the amenities that we have on site to, I'll say, contain and be able to provide a good experience for the guests, opposed to some other areas further, I'll say, downhill, kind of down in more of the basin. The issue with the sound, no matter where we put the stage, we're going to have bleeding off the site. And again, we feel that this location, through the studies that we've done, it impacts the residents on the north side. And again, the way the model was done, the study was done, and our sound guy can maybe give more technical detail information on that, but the facility was modeled three-dimensionally, and there are sensors that they placed around the perimeter. They used directional speakers and kind of put that into the computer model to look at how the sound would react in different areas with different stage configurations. Regardless of where we put that, we do have impact on the north side. The other part of the consideration I'd like you to think about is we are adjacent to 35W, and there is a lot of noise that comes off of 35W that exceeds the sound ordinance that's statewide already. If you stand up in that part of the hill or anywhere on the hill, to be we're already exceeding the 60, 65 decibels in that area. So it's hard to comply with something that's already not in compliance just because of our relationship adjacency to the highway. Yes, we will be adding music to that, but it's kind of a condition we live with already. Can I field any specific questions?
Yeah.
Or I'm trying to work through the issues here?
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Solner or any of his consultants that he brought with us tonight? Commissioner Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned earlier, noise is one of my concerns. And I know if you're gonna have a concert, you're gonna have amplified noise, you will have noise, there's no doubt about it. But we also have people living there on that northwestern side, the townhomes, and I'm concerned about their livability there. And there are some options staff are recommending for, to mitigate the impact of the noise on these people. What about the one I see that is, to me, is workable, is the relocation of the area, I mean, where the sound comes. Is that a possibility, or have you looked at that?
We did look at that, and we looked at a couple locations, and regardless of where that stage went, there is, again, sound coming out of the site. And the area that really is impacted is on the northern edge of the property. The modeling that was done used the buildings on Buck Hill's site as a three-dimensional object in the model, so they acted as a sound barrier. The buildings off our property were not modeled three-dimensionally, so the trees and the home, the units on the north side would act, again, along with the hillside, a little bit more of a barrier, knocking the sound down and softening that. But again, we're asking for, 6 concerts a year, and it's a 2-hour period that we would comply with the noise ordinance that starts at 10 o'clock. So the nighttime noise ordinance, we would definitely be in compliant with, but we just, no matter what we do at the stage, we can't find a way to get in compliance.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, one other question. The safety and security of residents of that area, the same area we're talking about, what plans you have to put in place to prevent people going through the yards, and you don't know who they are. Sometimes it can be people who don't mean very well.
Sure. I think, there has been a history with Buck Hill being closed in the summertime as a starting point. And what we're trying to do is activate Buck Hill as a year-round attraction, so people will be there. And that in itself will hopefully start changing the perception that it's a vacant land and we can come in here and do what we want to do, that there are people on here watching and what's going on. In addition to that, as we go into these concerts, we will have perimeter fencing and we will have security. We have a great relationship with the police department here, which we hire off-duty officers in the wintertime to work with us as well. And we would continue to work with the city to find ways to work with those measures, as well as we can provide security and staff further up on top of the hill to protect and monitor the traffic in those areas. I think we're open to work with the city on the streets and, perhaps other means to have other signage up there during those temporary events, but we are, we want to be good neighbors. We want to make sure they have a good experience. And again, we're not going to be running these every night. It's a smaller, couple-hour evening event.
I think, personally, I support what you're doing. I mean, Buck Hill is bring a lot of people from the state, out of the state, to our neighborhoods, and it's good for our economy, and it's good for our city. But we also have to be proactive. We don't wait until something happens and, by the way, we should have. I think we need to have in place things that will prevent things from happening. And I think you said that you'll be working with the Burnsville Police, and I would assume that you will be having extra officers or security when these events are being done.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh. Commissioner Bradrick?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Solner, I appreciate you coming this evening, and you said you've been associated with Buck Hill since 2015.
15.
Okay. During your association with Buck Hill, How many times has the homeowners association from Summit Hill reached out and shared any of the concerns that they've had with you from the standpoint of trespassing? Has that dialogue happened up until this point?
For me, no. We had a nice meeting with the community, the neighborhood, and there were issues that were brought up that, again, we had not been aware of. And I think, over the years, there has been vandalism on Buck Hill and things have happened out there. But direct, communication for me, it's relatively new and we're willing to, again, work and try to find means to monitor that better up there. We do have policies in place with our staff if, kids are coming in the wintertime and trying to, get on the lifts without paying. We, have ways to monitor that and kind of control, but the day-to-day, we haven't been, it has been brought to our attention, or my attention. Don might be able to have any comments on that, but, and again, we want to work with the neighbors and try to alleviate some of that.
Thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Brederick. Any questions?
Pressure's on.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Solner. Just for some clarification on the noise report. When you say 3D modeling, that means they didn't go out and do a test on site. It was done through a
Correct. There were
system.
sensors placed within the model, and if you allow, I'll see if Tim,
that would be
Casey, our
helpful.
sound engineer. I can
Just
ask
to
him
get-
to come up and maybe answer some of those specific
I
questions. if you
think
want.
that is creating more questions and maybe concerns in the moment, that model.
Sorry?
If you could give us your name and address for the record.
Sure, my name is Timothy Casey, and I'm employed by HDR Engineering in Minneapolis. My office address is 701 Xenia Drive, and that's with an X, Xenia Avenue, Suite 600.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. If you could just kind of maybe give us a quick rundown of that test, how it was conducted, and you don't have to go into the deep, depths of it, but just kind of give us a kind of a summary of that, the test that was in our background.
Sure, so there were no measurements of existing noise levels, and we didn't set up a stage and set up a PA and do measurements of full volume, concert noise levels out at Buck Hill. We used two different computer models that that HDR acousticians that work for me routinely use pretty much on a daily basis. So we're very familiar with them. The first model that we used, it was EASE, E-A-S-E, and the primary use for EASE is for modeling speakers and PA systems. It's used in churches and conference rooms and schools and everywhere that you have a PA system. And it allows you to select the specific make and model of speaker and its orientation. It's a very detailed computer model for helping design audio systems for specific rooms and specific applications. It wasn't intended to be used outdoors, and so we weren't able to utilize it to do the final modeling outdoors. What we use it for is to help us to define the noise source, which is the PA speakers. So we use the EASE model to calculate sound power levels and directivity patterns of a modern concert PA speaker system. And I don't know how often y'all get to see concerts, but modern PA speakers and concerts are hung in a curved fashion where there's smaller speakers that are aimed with a very specific directivity to provide audio coverage to a very specific portion of the audience. And so we use the EASE. I'm sorry, I'm kind of babbling. I just got home from a 2-week camping trip about 2 hours ago. So
This is the first thing you wanted to do when you
So we use the EASE model to help us define the directivity of the speakers that we ultimately modeled in the environmental noise modeling software that we use. That's a tool called CADNA. It's a German acoustical software that's based on international noise propagation standards, and we use it every day. And so we brought in the line array directivity characteristics from EASE. We borrowed some measurements that we performed at an outdoor music amphitheater in Jacksonville, Florida. The city has I can't remember the name of the park, but they just redid their stage and they hired us to measure existing noise levels during a modern rock and roll concert event. And then we did some modeling and helped them do some additional acoustical work on the design of the new facility. So anyway, we borrowed the noise measurements that we did of the concert as it was in progress. We used that as the noise emissions data that we plugged into our environmental noise model. And then we calculated noise levels throughout a Cartesian coordinate grid that's superimposed, which is just, a grid, superimposed over the project area. Project area was modeled in 3D. We imported a digital terrain model into CADNA. We configured the model to set up this Cartesian coordinate grid so that it calculated noise levels at each point, and it uses that to generate the noise contours. So when you look at the memo that we prepared, and I assume you all have seen it, those noise contours were developed using, it's the output of the CADNA noise model. I'm sorry, I'm really babbling tonight.
No, you're,
I did just get back. And then we also told CADNA, since we had the digital aerial photograph, we pulled that into GIS and put points on specific homes, like along the property line, and other buildings that are residential land uses, kind of in the immediate vicinity of Buck Hill. And we bring those coordinates, those 3D coordinates of the residential land uses into CADNA. It also calculates noise levels at those locations too. So we have the output of CADNA then is the noise contours, and then it's also noise levels calculated at specific locations that are representative of homes in the immediate vicinity of the property.
so have you conducted a test similar to this where you're kind of going into it as a hypothetical, this is what it could potentially look like outdoor? Because it sounds like the program's intended for indoor use. Is this something?
No. The EASE model, which is a PA speaker model, that model is intended for selecting PA systems and tweaking the alignment of the speakers to give you the coverage that you want. The CADNA model that we use to do the actual modeling that's shown in the report is something that we use almost every day, or all over the nation.
And that is applicable to an outdoor concert?
It can be used for an outdoor concert, yes.
Okay. And just really quickly, Ms. Dean, if this were to be approved in a year, I believe one of the conditions was that another noise study would be conducted. Would that be an independent test from a third party not related to the applicant?
As the conditions written,
For item number 3, I believe?
yeah. The noise study can certainly be from HDR, from the applicant. From a city standpoint, if we needed to confirm that the study's correct, we can consult out for that to verify it.
Okay.
If this, let's say the city decided to approve the proposal, let's say the study was completed, they met the regulations, but then the complaint was made, we could go out and measure the sound to see if they were in violation or not in the future. And that's how it would work on essentially a complaint basis. So we're assuming that their proposal will meet the study levels within the noise, and meet noise standards. But again, they could be completely under the requirement, depending on what type of music they have. It might not be amplified music. It might be a concert, an acoustic concert or something like that. And it really ultimately comes down to a complaint basis and for the city to go out and measure the sound.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would like to understand correctly, if this is approved by the city, and Buck Hill has the concerts, and let's say that the noise is causing concern for the people who live around there, and they call the city. You get a lot of calls from residents, or even 2 or 3 calls, because that's the 2 or 3 people who took the time to call. There are many more who would not call, but they'll be impacted. What will the city do if we get these complaints coming from our residents?
I mean, the city would have to go out and measure the sound, and it could be difficult to do because concerts are limited in the amount of time, 2 to 4 hours. And so really, we are relying on the study and relying on essentially the applicant's word that they would be within the noise levels. Yes, we could go out during a concert and measure that sound, actual sound. That's something that could be done. But typically, once you get police gets a phone call, likely the concert, is over by the time. We probably don't even own sound equipment. We'd probably have to hire a consultant to provide that that evening, and that may be very difficult to do.
I'm not, Mr. Chair, I'm not trying to prejudge what will happen. I want to give some sense of fairness to the people who live there. And if they have legitimate complaints about the noise that is keeping them up from sleeping or what, they have to call. They will call the city, and the city will have to do something about it. And I want them to understand that the city will have their back. They will be looking. They will do their own tests or whatever the case may be. That's the reason for my raising this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh. Commissioner Marobitz. Here, I wrote it down. Dang it.
You had said the noise was particularly bad on the northern edge of the residential area. Have you looked into or considered any type of portable sound panels that would mitigate some of that noise in that residential area?
Maybe take a pass at that one. It's almost impossible. I say almost because the north end of the site from our property line climbs about 70 feet up. And then the buildings are beyond that, and those are 3-story buildings. So if we put a 6, 8, 10-foot fence up on our property, it doesn't really do anything because of the way the topography and the land and the environment is on that north edge. Again, we moved the stage and the speakers around and looked at a couple different locations, but however we positioned that, the north edge was impacted pretty much in every situation that we looked at. So in that specific area, that doesn't work. How else to say that? The rest of the topography and the way that the hill is set up screens the residential units, homes around the community. Anything to add to that, or is that?
Well, we didn't, HDR didn't do any noise mitigation modeling, so I mean, it's conceivable that something like that could be evaluated, but we didn't do it. I would like to make 2 clarifying statements. The first is that Minnesota Rule 7030, Chapter 0080, addresses variances. The variance process is explicitly written into the state Minnesota noise standards. And I'm not sure if maybe you misparaphrased somebody from the MPCA or if they misparaphrased their understanding, but it doesn't require a change in state rules. It exists already. And if a city receives a noise complaint, typically they can call the MPCA and borrow sound level meters. So the MPCA doesn't really actively enforce their noise standards anymore, but they do share their noise measurements equipment, their sound level meters, when the need arises. because they push that burden of that enforcement to cities that adopt their noise standards.
Any other questions for the applicant? Anybody else? Okay. What I think we'll do is we will move to the public hearing, and then we might have you guys come back after that.
Sure.
Maybe. We'll just see how it goes. All right. The public hearing. Yep.
Just open the public hearing, 2 people who signed up.
Okay. Yep, we've got a sign-up sheet, we've got 2 people signed up to speak tonight. To that point, we have read all of your emails. We have heard a lot from staff tonight, and so please try to give us new information that we've not heard, if you can, and I guess I have to formally open the public hearing. Do I do that with a motion? Just say I'm opening the public hearing. And so our first speaker tonight is Rhonda Bernard. If you could come up to the podium, please.
Hello,
Hi, if you could give us your name and address for the record, please.
sure. My name is Rhonda Bernard. I live at 15287 Stonewood Court in Burnsville on the north end of Buck Hill.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out a couple things that maybe haven't been addressed tonight, and maybe you do have some background information via letters or that. I know I had sent in one, so I'm probably going to breeze through a few of these things, but I think taking some of the human consideration into this as far as who, concert goers and concerts. I love going to concerts. Mine are probably a little more infrequent these days, but there is a large concern about the noise with the studies and that. I was at the community meeting, and it seemed like there was a little bit of uncertainty as to what really the noise level was going to be, or maybe they could go up with their, there was talk about the snowmaking equipment, how it affected. So I'm not sure what, if you've got a rock and roll or, punk rock band there, that noise might be a little bit different than, some other type of concert that evening. So that is a huge concern for myself and a number of other people. And then also I wanted to bring up, they said that they would be having 6 concerts per year. And my concern is, I don't know if that would be a regulated number, but I would think that if they were successful at the first, 6 concerts, they would want to bring concerts in as often as they could to generate money, which I understand, being a business, you want to make money. Then also, it was brought up that maybe they'd have a day event where they might have a, country fest or that. Then how many hours will there be 3,000 to 5,000 people at Buck Hill? And I think that's one of the differences too with the sound, is during the winter, if they do have 5,000 skiers and families and that out there, it's throughout the day and the night. It's not in a 3 or 4 or 2 hour time period, which I think would, overpopulate the sound limit in that. And then another thing that was brought up was with regards to the restaurant at Buck Hill. They will be doing all of the catering and alcohol sales and that. And at that meeting, I had asked about, is it beer, hard alcohol, what kind of liquor would be served? And it was shared that, of course, they're going to try to sell everything that they have. And my biggest concern is when you're talking about 5,000 attendees at Buck Hill at a concert that come in and spend a few hours there. Not everybody drinks, but let's say the concert closes down at 10 o'clock and, some people leave. They said 70% of folks would leave within an hour of the concert. And so assuming that was 10 o'clock, there would still be, 1,500 attendees from the concert that would be hanging out, possibly drinking more. And then assuming of that 1,500, 50% were above the blood alcohol content, you know, that's 750 people that are intoxicated, going out, getting into their cars, calling Uber, you know, most likely making noise. And then also, you know, would there be Uber, taxis, shuttles to the mall going through closing of bar time to accommodate those folks? I would just think that would be a burden on the Burnsville Police Department once you get those cars and that type of thing out on the roads. And then I would say that people do come into Buck Hill, you know, at off times. In fact, I live on a cul-de-sac, and kids come in and they go right through that cul-de-sac and into the woods. And I'm not exactly sure what they're doing back there, but they're definitely overstepping their bounds by spending a lot of time in our cul-de-sac, of which is a private road. There's concern for parking there as well, because people do park there in the winter as well. The number of volunteers for security and off-duty police and that, I would think that would be a concern as well, with that many concert goers that, you know, they're there to have a good time. You know, there's alcohol, there's probably drugs somewhere in the mix too. And I'm just wondering how much time would be taken away from, you know, there's going to be calls for police from other things other than just working with the security at the event. And then it is the after of the concert and that people are going to be coming through our yards, because they're going to want to take the shortcut to their cars or to their homes or wherever they come, or if they're, say it's, you know, some type of band that, you know, a lot of rock and rollers are at, you know, they're going to be wanting to party all night. They're going to say, hey, let's just breeze through here. Let's walk back to the mall and get a ride, or to the zombie village or that. And so I'm personally concerned about my yard belongings, my cars, you know, my personal safety, because I feel like, you know, we do have a security alarm, but I kind of feel like I don't want to use it to protect myself from, you know, concert goers, or they could come back at another time. I would really like to ask the Planning Commission to allow us to take a step back and look at all of these different variances and that are coming into play here, and you know, maybe put together a public advisory committee to work with Buck Hill. I'm not opposed to Buck Hill. They are great. They've been great for the city in that. I think that as a community at large, though, looking at things like this, we really need to, you know, let's do it right off the bat, rather than have to go back and go, oh, wow, you know, boy, we had a lot of problems with that, or that was a success. Wow, you know, big issue over here, or that. And I think if there was kind of a sense of urgency in the beginning. I don't know if that's still going on, but, you know, I would just encourage you to take a little bit more time in planning that, so. Any comments or questions? Otherwise, I appreciate you listening to me, so thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. The next person to speak would be Joseph Russell. If you could please come to the podium and give us your, and you just said your name, but if you could give us your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Russell. I'm at 15345 Greenhaven Lane. I'm right on top of the hill, very close to this venue on the west side, I believe it is. Rhonda, thank you. You spoke a lot of what I wanted to say with regards to Buck Hill, the venue that they're proposing. First off, we love Buck Hill. We've been there since 1997. We enjoy the heck out of that hill in the wintertime. Also during the summer when the BMX hiking thing is going on, it's all fine. It's a wonderful addition to a neighborhood community, especially the winter activities. But couple of things that concern me. First off is the sound study. It seems to me that this sound study, we need to go back and start all over again with it. I do have the MPCA manual on all of their regulations. And I'm not an attorney and I'm not a MPCA person, but there are some things in here that are pretty simple to follow. Measurement of the sound must be made at or within the applicable NAC at the point of human activity, which is nearest the noise source. All measurements shall be made outdoors. I think I heard them say they were doing 3D things on models of something along that lines. I think they actually need to go out and do this sound study at Buck Hill. The MPCA, they have very specific ways that you're supposed to do this. There's equipment specifications. All the sound level measuring devices must meet type O, 1, 2, or S specifications under the American National Standards Institute. So it's very specific what the MPCA is looking for when you do these sound studies. They have to record their calibrations, their measurement procedures, the date, the time, the location, the noise source, wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, make, model, and serial number of the measuring equipment, field calibration results, monitoring levels, and then site sketches. One of the site sketches that we did see at the community meeting there at Buck Hill, I asked them if that did take into consideration the traffic noise from 35W, the traffic or the noise from 5,000 people, automobiles, so forth and so on, and no, it did not. And you do have to factor into those logarithms. You do have to factor that into your study. I think they need to go back and start all over again with a study that's going to satisfy the MPCA standards to make sure that they are doing it correctly so that we in the neighborhood surrounding know exactly what we're up against. Now, I'm way up on top of the hill, but according to the charts that we saw that night at Buck Hill, I'm at 70 to 75 decibels. And I'm up on top of the hill, a long ways away from that stage. There are my neighbors to the north, they're even closer than that. They're approaching 100 decibels or even more. This is going to be very noisy. This is going to be a noisy venue. And again, I understand where Buck Hill is coming from in all this, and I want to make sure that they stay successful. But I honestly believe that this is the wrong place to do it. This is a quiet neighborhood community, and you're changing the whole scope of the neighborhood by bringing in concerts, rock and roll, country music. I like rock and roll. I like country music, which leads me to my next point here, which is you bring in, as Rhonda said, 5,000 people. You're going to have rock and roll. You're going to have country music, a variety of different concerts, and then you bring in the presence of alcohol. I think as the evening goes on, even though they shut down the concert at 9:30, I believe the bar doesn't close until 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. I just think this is going to be a recipe for disaster, not only for the police department, but for those who live right near Buck Hill. There are people that come through our yards. Parking is the last issue I'll really talk about. They don't have enough parking at Buck Hill to handle that many people. And what I've heard is that they are going to be running a shuttle back and forth to various places as far away as Burnsville Center. But for those of us who live there and have lived there for many years, in the wintertime when they have their tournaments, for their ski tournaments, when they have the bed races for bridging and other major events, I would question how many people actually park at Burnsville Center and take the shuttle. What they do is they come up the hill and they park in our neighborhoods. And the quickest way, the shortest distance between their car and the hill is to cut through our yards. And I just see this happening even more so, especially if we're going to have intoxicated individuals at 10, 11, 12, 1, and 2 o'clock in the morning. So with that, I totally support Buck Hill's efforts. I've told them before, thank you for being a part of our community. But to me, this is the wrong idea for this area. There are other ways that hopefully they can accomplish what it is they're trying to accomplish. And I also have a question before I have a seat. The letter that we received in the community, it says that our intent is to establish a temporary stage for a few shows over the summer months. The card that I received from the city says that you're proposing to allow temporary outdoor concerts and related events held outside of a permanent amphitheater. That's the first I've heard of a permanent amphitheater.
I think that relates to outside of rather than a permanent amphitheater. Is that correct?
If I could provide clarification, Chair. There's specific, so a permanent amphitheater would be fixed seating, a fixed venue. And so that's just for clarification, that this isn't a fixed venue. It does not have permanent seating. The stage, the equipment related to it is brought in on a temporary basis for the limited number of proposed concerts. So there's no fixed seating, there's no fixed venue,
So maybe we
no
use
building.
rather than a permanent amphitheater.
Okay.
I was a little confused about that at my first glance too.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Our next person is Bob Crone. Bob, if you could come to the podium and repeat your name and give us your address.
Hi, my name is Bob Crone. I live at 15400 Bryant Avenue. I am directly I'm directly west in the R1 quadrant that was shown on there. I've been on that neighborhood for about 5 years now. So over the time period, very good relationship with Buck Hill. The one thing I've brought up over the last 8 months with the gentlemen that are the owners of it, starting in December, they came to some neighborhood meetings and introducing what they wanted to do. And the noise for me being at the top of the hill is not so much the important thing as much as the trespassing and the transient activity. During the off-season and during the on-season in the wintertime, there's a variety of transient activity that happens, and that's just by the nature of, as was described by Dave, there's no activity going on in the summertime, spring through the fall. So kids, especially once school gets out, kids like to go up to Buck Hill. They like to look around, etc. I'm very much in support of this action, of having the concert series, both at the various meetings as well as having a one-on-one conversation just last week with Buck Hill, addressing my concern about the trespassing. And they were very receptive, and they were very much understanding about the need. What's been addressed up to this point has been mostly in the townhome area. It's just as much of a concern at the top of the hill, directly west as well. And they said that they will definitely work with us. So for me, that and our neighborhood, as was described by some of the other residents, we are a quiet community. Part of the reason I purchased where I did is because it is quiet up there. And we don't have a lot of the transient traffic. We're at the end of a cul-de-sac. And I don't want to lose that. And I don't want to lose Buck Hill either. And that is a very important thing to me as well, because they are very good for our community. So in summation, what's important to me is working on the parking and the transient activity that surrounds the events during the events. Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Crone, appreciate it. And then the last person on the list is Ken, and I apologize if it's Bipus or Bipic, I can't tell if that's a G or an S. If you could give us your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Kenneth Pipes.
Bipes, thank you.
I live at 15409 Bryant Avenue. I'm at, well, one of the lifts is about 60 feet from my back door. And our property backs up to Buck Hill. And like I say, the lift is a short distance from our back fence. In all the years we've lived by Buck Hill, we find that they are some of the best neighbors we've ever had. In the same time, they really had no concerns or issues. If something was going to change and if there would have been an unusual noise into the evening, they would have always been very good neighbors to let us know. We understand the type of business they are in, and they need to look for additional sources of revenue to keep their business going. We understand with the addition of concerts that might help, and also to keep Buck Hill's name in the minds of people when it isn't snowing. We certainly don't want them to close, as many have had at the Burnsville Center and surrounding areas. I'm also surveyed close by neighbors and have talked to Buck Hill about our concerns, which they take very seriously. Should others arise in the future, there is a high level of confidence that they will address them immediately. I've highly recommended that the council approve Buck Hill to move forward with the concert. And I worked for Dakota County for 28 years. I have been retired. So I know how traffic happens around Dakota County, and I think Buck Hill will take care of that, everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bipus. That's the last for the sign-in sheet. If anybody else would like to speak to this issue, you can come to the, could you please come to the podium and if you could give us your name and address for the record.
Sure. Jim Hunter, 555 Stonewood Lane, and I'm right on the north side, so sort of right in the blast zone, if you will. I did submit an email before, so I was just going to ask the question. You got that email to them, and you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, that you already have taken into account the email input.
Yes, we received all the emails in our background.
All right. Well, I just wanted to reiterate that, and I'm good with that email.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to the? If you could give us your name and address for that.
Scott Johnson, 580 Stonewood Way, Burnsville. I moved specifically to where I live because of Buck Hill. I grew up skiing on it, and I liked the venue, and I was thrilled to hear they were going to move this forward, to be developing more things in the community, having more activities that would engage both locally and outstate, and bring more commerce to that part of Burnsville. There's many large companies closing down and leaving and moving away. We need this to bring people to the community, and it's a good thing for the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anybody else?
Hello, my name's Andrew Berglund. I live at 435 Stonewood Lane. I'm pretty much right on the northern edge of Buck Hill. I guess one comment I would like to make is, Buck Hill's been a very good neighbor to me over the few years I've lived there. I'm not too worried about the noise. I think it's going to be pretty intense during the concert. But the concerts are only going to be, 2-3 hours maybe. The one thing that I would like to bring up, and a lot of people have already touched on it, is the security issue. I've had multiple people trespassing during the ski season. I've had to ask people to leave my yard during the ski season. One thing I guess I would like to say is maybe we should propose some sort of security plan as far as, based on the number of attendees, this is how many security people need to be working. Maybe even having a couple security people in the neighborhood. I guess supervising, making sure people aren't trespassing. basically, I would just like maybe more of a plan on what Buck Hill, I guess, plans to do for security, is my big concern. But other than that, I think it's a really creative idea. Great way to bring revenue people to the area and show off your hill, and but thank you, yeah.
Thanks for coming. I saw another hand go up.
My name is Janet Rasmussen. I live at 15305 Stonewood Court. So I'm on the north end. And my main window, looks out on the Toboggan Hill. So there aren't a lot of trees there. There's probably 10. So I can see the snowmakers and everything. And I just thought it was so cool when I bought this place because it was great. I thought this will be great. I can watch the skiers and it's beautiful. And I haven't even lived there a year yet. But this past winter, when there finally was snow, I know it took a while, with the Toboggan Hill, it was great. I mean, people were tobogganing, but the amount of litter in my yard was incredible. Not to mention the people that walk through my yard, and they continue to walk through my yard. And there are a lot of kids, young kids that do that, but all throughout the year, they are walking through my yard right on the path, and I'm right by the path where the bikers go into Buck Hill. And it's scary. Last year, my very first winter here, I saw footsteps coming from Buck Hill to my lower level, to my windows, and to my doors. And it's very scary. So I'm concerned about the security at night, and I'm concerned about the noise, and I'm concerned about the litter. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for participating. Is there anybody else that would like to speak?
Ron Hedberg at 15301 Greenhaven Lane. I live a couple blocks away, so I don't have the security concerns of people walking through my yard or anything like that. I just want to say that I respect their efforts to make a year-round revenue and some of that, so I support that. I realize people have a wide variety of taste in music, but another way of looking at it is, hey, the neighborhood gets a free concert they can listen to, so I just want to say I'm for this, and I realize I don't have the same concerns of some of the other people, but I'm glad you're doing well, and I'm just glad you're in the community.
Thank you. Is there, yep.
My name is Barb Simonton, and I live at 15345 Greenhaven Lane. And we have been there for right on 20 years. And I would like, one of the points that I wanted to touch on, because of comments that were made that kind of missed a point, kind of actually skewed things a little bit. We too chose that townhome out of a number of others when we were looking around because we really thought this was a great place. There used to be a water park there too. It's not there. And we do miss it. It was a fun place. We don't want to lose Buck Hill. We want to make sure they're able to, continue to be a growing concern, but we want to see it grow healthfully. When we look at what we have had issues in the past, and we have reported them, for Mr. Solner, having only been there 2 years, he might not remember some of these things. The snowmaking the groomer was a big issue. I mean, we had a lot of people doing a lot of testimony about that because it exceeded the noise ordinance when it was coming back up the hill. And when we first got there 20 years ago, there were a lot more trees than there are now. And those trees have been steadily coming down for the developments, especially on that north end. And the more trees that came down, the more sound we got, including the freeway. And to say that, well, 35W is already this loud, we already put up with it, so, well, that's kind of one of the issues that we haven't been getting across well. We already have that noise level from 35W. We don't want a sound wall. We don't want to be fenced in. We don't want to be fenced out. But we have been tolerant of that because it was there when we came. That freeway was there. And so we understand it was there and we made that choice. But now we're going to add the additional intolerable levels on top of the freeway noise. So we can't be just measuring the speakers or the crowd noise. We have to add it on top of that level that we already have. And we're not hearing anybody address how they're going to do that. If we decide that, oh my gosh, we've got to do something about this, this concert was just way out, you're not going to come out there and hear that concert. That concert might have been a different, type of music, and by the time we get somebody to come out and look at it, they're playing, the Teddy Bear Band. And so we are concerned about being proactive about this. When we talk about the parking issues, it not only is a problem with people parking and then walking right through the stone streets, but in the summertime, people are going to be a little bit more active and hanging out a little bit more as they're doing things than when it's 10 below and they're walking in ski clothes. The summer months are going to bring more outdoor activity, more fun outdoors. They're going to want to hang out a little bit longer and have a little more fun than when it's 10 below. And so we do expect to see an uptick of that activity through our neighborhood, even more so than we see now. And to be quite honest, it is frustrating to try to get up Buck Hill sometimes just without cars parked, haphazardly up that hill. Sometimes we keep sliding back down, it's part of living there. But in the summertime, that's not going to be fun because they're not going. I guess I would be interested in seeing the number of people that actually get in that shuttle and go back and forth to their vehicles, because we see the activity on those streets and because we totally support Buck Hill. The way it was, 20 years ago when we moved in, we were the ones who came in. They were already there. And so we keep our mouths shut and we put up with stuff and we do comment about it. We do make mention of it, and we have for many years. And we did, especially after the development started and the trees started coming down. And so we have to add the idea that it's summer activity. People hang out a little bit longer than they do during the winter activity. I don't know how they're going to clear that many people out of the area, because that's what they're wanting, is to get them to come in and spend money at their shops and things as they get those developed. And so it's actually going to encourage people to hang out longer. So there's just those personal things that can't be measured by a sound study. And we really won't have any way to respond to the problems. If it comes to us saying, well, this concert was way louder than the others, it was a problem. And we have to call in and try to get somebody to come out and determine that, in fact, that one of the rules, one of the things has been, violated. There's not going to be any kind of consequence to them. And that's a concern for us. That if they could do it and then, everybody just kind of has to go, well, we don't really have anything in the plan that says here's what the consequence will be. We don't know if they decide, it started out with, 4 concerts, now we're seeing it 6. If they decide, well, there's this really good one that we really want to do, how easy is it going to be able to get that variance for the 7th one without any additional consequences? And so we are concerned. We do want to see that there are going to be consequences if they don't live up to what you guys decide to do. And that's all I have to say, and thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you for coming out tonight. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this item? Seeing nobody, I will close the public hearing. And I have a few questions for the applicant. Does any of the other commission have questions for the applicant? No. I'm glad Don McClure is here tonight. Would you mind coming up and just asking a couple of questions, or answering a couple of questions? There was some questions about historically relating to trespassing and the shuttle runs. Could you give us just a brief background on?
I think the big came away from the neighborhood meeting was that we had some litter issues that we were not aware of in the Greenhaven neighborhood, and then we heard that loud and clear, and we'll make corrective action for that during our winter months, and of course this will follow through the summer months as well. We also heard that there were some trespassing issues in the wintertime, which we were not aware of either, and we'll do our best to try to solve that. Our goal is to come in here with a summer venue and do it first class the first time with adequate security staffing, adequate medical staffing. It's not our intention to come here and do this thing wrong. It's our intention to come in and do it right and succeed at it and try to make this seasonal business successful. We are being challenged by more adverse winter weather, which is making our core winter business subject. And obviously that's why we're trying to look at other seasons to make this a viable business and a viable site on 60 acres in Burnsville, largest single landowner in Burnsville that's left, to my knowledge. So that sums it up in a nutshell. We learned some things at that neighborhood meeting. We're going to make some corrective action. We intend to do this right the first time. We don't intend to be back here again a second time saying, please forgive us. So that's our intent.
Thank you very much. Okay. If there's no other questions for the applicant, I would turn it over to the commission for either a motion or discussion on this piece. Commissioner Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm looking at condition number 6. To me, there is some redundancy there. The maximum number of amphitheater patrons shall be 4,500 people, inclusive of all paid and complimentary tickets. The maximum site occupancy for a temporary and amphitheater shall not exceed 4999 people, and it shall be applicant's responsibility to reduce the number of tickets sold if necessary to meet this requirement. I think we need to wordsmith that, Mr. Chair. I agree with the condition, but I think we need to wordsmith it to make it more precise and avoid redundancy.
If, Ms. Dean, is that wording coming from the MPCA regarding the limits of decibels, or what is that rooted in?
Item number 6, it's in regards to that EAW threshold and making sure that we're under that limitation for them to have to go through that process.
Is that guided by the city or?
No, state requirements.
State requirement. So in order to what would you like to see as far as?
The maximum number of amphitheater patrons shall be 4,500 people, inclusive of all paid and complimentary tickets, and a maximum of 4999 people, inclusive of staff. Period. Yeah, we make it clear that's the maximum. What else do we want to hear?
I think we still have to have some type of wording referencing that the applicant has to provide the city with a copy of record of attendance.
No, I agree with that. I'm just talking about
As
that.
far as cleaning up those first.
Yes. I don't want to tell the applicant that he has to reduce the number of tickets sold. That's his problem. He needs to meet the 49.99 number.
Reduce the number of tickets sold. That does, well,
You see what I'm getting at?
yeah, so we would
Yeah, just
strike,
wordsmith that.
I would refer to staff if we can do that. And so you would look to strike out where would you add your period, Commissioner Singh?
The second statement says the maximum site occupancy for the amphitheater shall not exceed 49.99 people, inclusive of staff, including staff, period. Then you go to the applicant or operators shall provide the city.
I would look to,
Chair, members of the commission, so you want us to strike out that first sentence, is that correct?
No. Let me repeat. The maximum, I'm starting 6. The maximum number of amphitheater patrons shall be 4,500 people, inclusive of all paid and complimentary tickets. Okay, we could have said 49.99 people, inclusive of staff, paid and complimentary tickets, period. But we continue, the maximum site, we're repeating it, the maximum site occupancy for the temporary amphitheater shall not exceed 49.99 people, and it shall be the applicant, I don't want this piece, it shall be the applicant's responsibility to reduce the number of tickets sold if necessary to meet this requirement. I think that the applicant knows that cannot have more than 49.99. It's clearly stated in the first 2 statements and 6.
So, Chair, members of the commission, I think what this is getting at is, let's say they needed 600 staff members, and there were vendors, and there were emergency personnel and security, that their ticket numbers may need to drop. And so it's...
I think I've made my point, Mr. Chair.
and with that, the assumption there is that those numbers could change based on the type of event, that you might have one event that would generate more EMS staff. I'm not gonna single out a single genre, but if one, maybe a concert had more need for higher security than another.
Correct, yep. So it allows for essentially more vendors, more staff, more security personnel. So their ticket sales, in that case, let's say there's 600 people needed to staff the event, their ticket sales may actually be less.
Mr. Chair, it's very simple. One sentence that says the maximum number of people, inclusive staff, complimentary tickets is 49.99, period. That's my point.
Mr. Chair, I think the reason for this is we're looking for a way to allow this, but also address the EAW standard, and it's just not easy to do that. That's why I believe that both of those standards are in there. If you wanted to state something to the effect that it's their responsibility to provide documentation to the city that they do not exceed, or that they have
I'm
not
not
gone through
questioning
that
that. I'm not
EAW,
questioning that.
that we can do.
All I'm questioning the redundancy. I mean, it's just wordsmith. That's okay. I think if it's necessary to keep it, then I'll go with that.
I think just given that we're dealing with the EAW, it's maybe there is a catch-all to prevent. I think if you're adamant about, well, I would just, if you're satisfied with your.
That's okay. I mean, it's not that important. It's just pointed to me it was redundant.
Okay.
You don't need to spend more time on it.
Is there any other comments that anybody else, Commissioner Frederick?
Thank you, Chair Workman. I have a couple of clarifying questions based around the MPCA. I've been sitting up here for quite a while, and we typically can get conflicting information. So I just want to clarify something on the standpoint of the variance. In our background, in the letter that came from Christine Steinwand, who is with the MPCA, The above points are important because the language, chapter 7030-0030, which states that any municipality having authority to regulate land use shall take all reasonable measures within its jurisdiction to prevent the establishment of land use activities listed in noise area classifications. Standards established will be violated immediately upon establishment of land use. So what they're telling us is, we are simply, to simplify this, and I have to do that sometimes, the MPCA has a standard. We are asking the applicant to meet that standard, how we have always asked that to be done in the past, whatever modeling that the city has in place or whatever staff believes to be appropriate. We are simply asking in one of the conditions, because they are asking as a point of the PUD, as a variance, to be able to exceed that. And staff's point, if I'm understanding this, is that our recommendation is there needs to be adjustments, whatever it may be, to be able to simply meet the MPCA standards. Do I have my head wrapped around that correctly? Okay. Because a lot of times I need to try to, in my head, bring back to why are we here? We are here to try to understand the specific variances that they were asking for. And the variances in the beginning were only 3. And so, okay, I just want to make sure I understood that. We had a question based around, we have limitations to stop times, but there is nothing in our background to say that a concert, we had some stuff in the traffic and modeling based around specific, 2 o'clock opening and different things. But we do have a limited stop time, but we don't truly have a limited start time in our background information. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then, Chair, I guess truly the issue that I have so far is kind of a resonating security issue. And in many cases, people come in front of us from a PUD, and part of the PUD process is that there are things that we're looking for variances, and then there's give back and the negotiation to get to the end. I think it's been very clear that the need for security is important. And so my suggestion, and this is difficult for me to ask for an additional requirement, because I know it takes time from staff, but in this instance, I would like to throw out the opportunity of a 1-year review, where staff comes back to us, just like they have in many cases of other events, that says, we've had a 1-year history. What are our violations? Were there complaints? As the city, we do have rules and regulations from different things, and there's policies and procedures that citizens can follow, that if they can make a complaint, and then staff can come back to both us and the city council from a standpoint of what truly happened in that first year. Did they mitigate the trespassing, or did they mitigate the other stuff? And I see that as a happy medium, as a give or take from the standpoint to solve. Because this evening, we had several comments about noise, but the resonating piece is truly how the neighborhood is affected. I'm a big fan of, several people said where the Buck Hill was there when they moved in, and truly, a lot of times we don't have people that understand that. But then stepping outside of those bounds, we have a lot of applications, whether it was Ames Construction or whatever may be in past of us, that there's give and take, and what was there when they moved in, and what is kind of an establishment of what can they fix. And so I would, I guess, like to suggest that, but I would like to, I guess, ask staff why because we don't like to go back and do a 1-year review, what was the reasoning behind, because in the past, something this questionable and new to us, we've typically went back and looked at it a year afterwards. Many other things, signage for legacy events.
That is something, certainly if you wanted to add as a condition for it to come back in a year for review and discussion, that can certainly be added.
Okay.
There is, I think we would need the city attorney to look at that though as well, because this is a PUD.
Okay.
And once it's published, just like an ordinance, it's done. So although we can come back and review it, I don't know that we have the legal authority to
That's why I
change
asked.
it. Yeah, so what I would suggest, if that's something that the commission feels should be done, is to include it as a condition and then have staff verify with the city attorney as to how the condition should be.
So realistically, we could add the condition full knowing that it may get, the council may have to make a change once it gets to the council.
I think, yes, you're making your recommendation as to why, and that's important, and they need to see that, and then ultimately, the city attorney would be responsible for what that language can or can't be, yes.
So I typically don't try to make changes to, I have a lot of faith in what staff has done, so I can certainly understand where Commissioner Singh was coming from number 6, but at this point, I'd like to, if it's at all possible, I'd like to kind of leave the wording as is, as staff put that information in there, and I would just like to see I would like the opportunity for us to look at, from a legal standpoint, the opportunity to do a one-year review. Chair, that's all my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Bradrick. Commissioner Singh?
Just a follow-up on what Commissioner Bradrick was, and this is for staff. Deb, couldn't we put this as part of our review on our work plan for the next year?
What I'm saying is that with a planned unit development, whatever is approved, that becomes the zoning district. And once that's established, we're limited as to what we can do because they're an applicant. So I think if the commission feels that that's something to look at in a year for this, that you should include that. And then just knowing that we would need to probably work with the city attorney on exactly how that would be worded.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Garros, would I be correct in saying that if we had followed the conditional use permit path, then at that point, part of the conditional use could have been tied to an annual review?
Yes.
Versus using a
A PUD is a
PUD
little
where we're
bit
tying
separate.
it to the land?
Correct.
Okay. I understand the limitations. Thank you.
Commissioner Walter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to first of all thank everybody who participated in this tonight, because I know people have different viewpoints on this, but it was very respectful, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the applicants working with the neighborhood on these issues. You know, it's a tough decision for us and what we recommend to the city council. I think for me, the biggest issue here is the noise study, and the way this recommendation is worded that basically sends it back for more noise study, I think is important, because the way I was looking at that document, there's really nothing in that existing study that leads me to believe it's gonna, you know, there just needs to be some more work done on that piece. So I am supportive of the wording as it is, and also appreciate Chair Emeritus Bradrick's suggestion for the annual review. I think that's important to this as well, so.
Would you like to make a motion, Commissioner?
I would. I'm glad you reminded me. That was the whole purpose of my, my speaking. Mr. Chair, I move that the plan.
I'm not sure, Paul, is there a chance to make a comment? Because there's item 3, which addresses something that I'm not sure we're able to achieve.
Only if you want to recognize, I think right now you're in the process of making a motion, so I think you just need to continue with that.
He's got to finish his motion.
Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval for a PUD amendment to allow temporary outdoor concerts and related events held outside of a permanent amphitheater located at 15400 Buck Hill Road, subject to the following 12 conditions, with the addition of a 13th based on the annual review that was previously discussed.
We have a motion. We have a second. Is there any discussion on this item before we go to a vote?
I think you need to go through the vote.
Okay.
At this point, it's.
I think we've
beyond
gotten
that.
to this point. So we've got a motion and a second. So I would say all those in favor of the motion presented signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. And the motion carries. And that will go before the city council on next Tuesday, July 18th. And there will be an opportunity at that meeting. Okay. Moving on to our next item. If I can find my notes here. We've got another public hearing for an application for Dane Summit at Buck Hill LLC for a planned unit development amendment to allow rental townhomes and final plat of a 32-unit residential townhome plat to be known as the Summit at Buck Hill 3rd Edition, located at 15200 Burnhaven Drive. And Ms. Garros will be presenting that this evening.
Thank you, Commissioners, and for those folks that are here for this application. For Donnie Summit at Buck Hill, this is a development that was approved back in 2015. And I think just with the economy and various things going on with housing, the project, the PUD agreement was signed and executed. However, the final plat was not submitted. Since that time, the economy has changed and the applicant is requesting an amendment. So they're asking us to basically reopen that project again and to look at changing one of the items in the planned unit development. And that would be when when this property was initially looked at for development, it was 2 different applicants ago, if you will. And there was a condition placed on the sale of the land that the development be owner occupied. And that once that land was sold and then resold to the current property owner, that condition is still on there. What the applicant is requesting is they're requesting an amendment to allow the townhome units to have the opportunity to also have rental units as opposed to the requirement now that everything has to be owner occupied. That's the only change that's being requested in terms of the planned unit development. The subject site is close to the site that we were looking at previously with Buck Hill. We have it on Burnhaven Drive. It actually consists of 2 different properties, north and south. And this is just a photograph showing additional area beyond. This is the subject site here. The approval that they received is for a townhome project, very similar product as to what they have constructed in other projects within the neighborhood. And again, the only change to the planned unit development is to allow them the option to have rental units within the development. They indicate in their narrative it's not their intent to have all rental units. They just want to have the opportunity to do that based on current market conditions. The final plat is something that, as long as the final plat is consistent with the approved preliminary plat, which it is, then that would need to be recommended for approval. The PUD amendment, you have some discussion on. With the plat, it's consistent with the approved preliminary plat, so that we would need to recommend approval of for the plat. And with that, there are the PUD benefits and deviations are exactly the same as they were in 2015. They are looking at development is consistent with the zoning ordinance, with comp plan, and compatible with the other development in the neighborhood. Construction of the units, it will be an improvement to the area. And the last one is development, hopefully will resolve neighborhood concerns about the upkeep of the vacant property. As you know, it's very common with vacant property for people sometimes to dump things, litter, and various weeds, those types of things. So with this actually being developed, those issues should go away. The 2 deviations are really related to the plat itself, and they allowed for reduced setbacks between the units and the two collector streets within the development, those being Burnhaven and Greenhaven Drive, going from a 50-foot to a 40-foot setback. The other is a deviation actually between the townhome buildings themselves to allow them to be 15 feet apart as opposed to the ordinance standard of 20 feet. And again, those deviations were approved as part of the 2015 approval and even go further back than that. The recommendation from staff is to approve the planned unit development amendment and also the final plat, subject to the following condition. One is our standard condition that previous approvals remain in effect. 2 and 3 really relate to the developer needs to identify and consent that they agree to repeal previous planned unit development agreements which are on file with Dakota County. So that is what item 2 or condition 2 and condition 3 relate to. And then item 4, there will need to be a new development contract for this because the fee schedules have changed in a couple of years, and there are also some differences in terms of warranty requirements and whatnot. And the applicant has been made aware of those and has no issues with that. And with that, this is a public hearing. I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Deb. Is there any questions for Ms. Garros from the commission? Commissioner Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Garros, there are 2 deviations regarding setbacks.
Yes.
And I assume that staff supports both of those.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Singh. Are there any other questions for Ms. Garros? Commissioner
Thank you.
Bradrick, I'm going to get one of these.
Chair.
Chair.
Workman. Deb, I was I was the chair when we passed this the first time, and I'm glad that, because I want to clarify in the background, there are deviations, but we approved them in the beginning, and all we're doing here is the deviation of rental, and the applicant has been very upfront saying that they're not looking to have a rental community, they're looking to sustain as they build units to rent them and then sell them. The background did state that we had done that with the original development, because when they started this, and then the Great Depression, the second Great Depression moved in. So really, all we're doing here is amending the PUD to allow something that we actually did in phase 1 in a different fashion. Is that a
Pretty much. I
correct
mean,
statement?
basically,
Okay.
it's just allowing them the opportunity, if they want to, be able to rent some of the units, that they would be able to do so. Because what is currently in the PUD is that it all has to be owner occupied.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that point.
Thank you.
Chair, that's all I have.
Thank
I would
you.
be in support of this application.
Commissioner Bradrick, thank you for your statement, questions. Deb, do we have the, Commissioner Walter, did you have?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. One question, and maybe I missed it in the material. So if they become a rental unit, it would be the developer that is renting them, or is there some other entity that would own the rental units?
No, the developer is proposing, actually, that while they own, that they could rent it out, but this would allow also someone to basically, if they want to purchase it and rent it, they would be able to do
okay.
so as well.
Thank you.
Do we have the applicant here? Not necessary. Okay. Then I would move to open the public hearing, and I will do that now. And if there's anybody that would like to speak to this, please feel free to come to the podium. And since we have no
This is
one.
our applicant for the next.
Okay. We're getting there. We got 2 more to go. I will close the public hearing, and I will turn it back over to the commission for either a motion or discussion.
Chair, I would like to make a motion.
Go ahead. Yep.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend the City Council approval of the PUD amendment for a townhome development and final plat of Summit Buck Hill 3rd Edition located at 15200 Burnhaven Drive with the 4 existing conditions that staff has recommended.
We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
A second from Commissioner Walter. All of those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. And I have here that will go in front of that will not go in front of the City Council. That will be on the agenda next Tuesday, the 18th. Our next application is, I gotta take a cue from Commissioner Bradrick and put this in a binder. Application, thank you, Dan. Port Maryland LLC DBA US Salt for a PUD amendment and CUP amendment to replace existing equipment hopper and bucket elevator located at 1020 Black Dog Road West. And I believe Ms. Garros is staying at the podium.
Begin again. The applicant, actually, US Salt has owned the property for many, many, many years, even dating back prior to 1964 when the city became actually incorporated as a city. There is a new owner that, a co-owner that's involved with the project, and they are really working to upgrade the site in many respects. There's not been a whole lot of work and upgrades made to the facility in the 40-some years since the 1960s. There was the first conditional use permit for the project. We're looking at primarily the site, the eastern part of the site, but actually the site does contain 2 separate lots, and they're identified on the pictometry. And this is also just another aerial representation of, you've got the river and the facility. Their property goes probably just a little bit beyond this and then comes back and up to this area here. What we're looking at is they're looking to replace equipment in a structure, which is the bucket elevator, which is right in this location. And this aerial photo gives you a little bit better idea. This is the hopper, and then it's also elevated as the proposed one will be, and then trucks basically can pull through and be loaded and then move on from that site. In addition to replacing this hopper, they are looking to reuse their existing elevator, but to add it to a tower, which will facilitate their operations much more efficiently than what they currently have. The overall height for the tower is proposed to be 71 feet. In the zoning district where this property is located, initially it was in the I-2 General Industrial Zoning District. Later it was changed to the Gateway Industrial Medium District. And in any of the industrial districts, there is not a height limit per se, but it does require a conditional use permit, or in this case, a PUD amendment to go taller than 45 feet. And that's primarily to allow the city to evaluate what the proposal is to make sure that we are able to access it and serve it adequately for fire, etc. So in this case, that will not be an issue. This application is a little bit different than most applications in that a building permit is not required for them to do this. They will need an electrical permit, but that would be it. So we're looking at a situation with this project approval where normally we can place conditions that such and such shall be provided by the time or prior to issuing a building permit. We don't have that option in this case because no building permit is required for this. One of the issues that we have is, unfortunately, there is some signage on that the manufacturer puts on this. Because the site is within 300 feet of the river, it is in a shoreline district. And in the shoreline district, there are specific restrictions for properties that have water access. And they are that you can only basically identify what the name of the business is and the products. And then also the height of the sign can't exceed 10 feet above grade. So in this case, we have recommended a condition that like the existing facilities out there, that the new facilities be painted a tan color, and that if there is any signage that they want to have, it will need to conform to the sign ordinance for the shoreline district. I'm not going to go through the details. If you have questions, we have someone here who can go through all of these details and explain it very well to you. What I wanted to show you here is this is basically the tower, and it's a lattice type structure. They don't need any guy wires. And where the height is, we have the 71-foot height, is up and through this area. The reason for when we need a conditional use permit, one of the main elements you look at is screening. And for this, the site is located, I can't really see it too well on there. The site is located in between the two fabric-covered structures. These were approved relatively recently, and we've got the site basically in through here. The structures here were approved with a PUD to be 60 feet tall as opposed to 45 feet. This will be 71 feet, but again, it's more of a lattice structure. It's not a solid type structure, and it will be between these two buildings, and you've got the highway 35W in this location, so it will be fairly well screened. As far as the other conditions that we are recommending, we have indicated 9 conditions. One of the other conditions is that this site not be required to be platted with the land use approval. And we've done this in other occasions, especially when there's not an actual building being constructed. Again, typically when we have a building, then you apply things like the occupancy, the use, the park dedication, those types of things come into play. This is something that is not occupied. It's more like a piece of equipment than a building. All of the CUP and planned unit development approvals since the late 60s have referenced new building to be constructed. The actual building has not been constructed yet to date. We have these two buildings with the fabric structures, but the building that they've kind of always talked about is down in this area here. What staff is suggesting is, because this is just more of a machinery equipment type thing, is to allow the applicant to continue to process this land use application and plat at such a time in the future when they actually come in with a building, want to build on the site. At that time, they would need a PUD amendment anyway for the building, and then everyone is put on notice as to when platting would occur and be required for the property. With that, one of the other conditions relates to landscaping. In 1986, there was a landscape plan that was approved. Again, they're looking at constructing a larger warehouse and bagging facility. Really, the 2 buildings that are out there now take the place of this. And again, we're looking at this office type facility here. The landscaping was a condition that be installed at such a time a building is constructed. Because the city didn't require that be installed in our latest amendment back in 2007, again, we're suggesting that occur in the future when there's a building proposed and when the property is platted. Likely, when you have a building out there, you're going to have people around, someone to hopefully maintain the landscaping so that it actually has a chance of living. So with that, our recommendation is for approval of both the PUD and the conditional use permit, subject to the, 9 conditions identified. And if you'd like me to go through those, I can. The applicant is here and can address any questions and explain to you in great detail barge loading and unloading in this hopper facility. He's been very helpful for me. So I'll stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff or the applicant at this time? No questions. Do you have anything you'd like to address to us while you're here? Okay. All right, so with that, I will move to the public hearing and open that. And if anybody would like to come and speak, please feel free to do that. Seeing that there is no one, I will close the public hearing and I will toss it back to the commission for either a motion or discussion on US Salt.
Mr. Chair, this is a very straightforward application. He's updating his equipment. I think the conditions cover all the safeguards that staff would like to see done, and would like to move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council approval of the PUD and the CUP amendment to allow US Salt to replace existing equipment That's the hopper and the bucket elevator located at 1020 Black Dog Road West, subject to the following 9 conditions as presented by staff.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay, and the application it's approved. Our next item is a public hearing for an application of the City of Burnsville for an ordinance amendment to Title 10 zoning related to small cell wireless facilities. And Ms. Dean is presenting that.
Good evening again, Chair, members of the commission. In this year's legislative session, a bill was passed to address what's called small cell wireless. And I'll move to a photo example. Essentially, the bill allows for the small cell equipment to be located on facilities, towers, light poles, infrastructure within city right-of-way or within right-of-way. Here's an example of what a small cell facility looks like. Up top, at the top of this electric pole, is an equipment antenna. There's boxes located here and an antenna on top of this light fixture, as well as these other attachments. And again, another example of what small cell facilities look like, the various attachments on this light pole. Specifically, within the legislative bill, spoke to allowing cities to require conditional use permits if located within residential areas. So before you tonight, the ordinance speaks to if a small cell facility is located within residential, that a conditional use permit shall be required. The bill also allows for the city to place reasonable conditions on that conditional use permit, which we have spelled out in our draft ordinance. So the city would specifically have to make changes to Title 10, Chapter 7, our general provisions, where we talk about essential services. Right now, we don't really speak to small cell wireless. We would have to specifically speak to that. So there's some wording modification that's proposed, as well as those conditional use permit conditions are spelled out. This, again, does allow for towers to be located within right-of-way. The conditions that we're proposing from a staff standpoint deal with height, location. We want to make sure that if these are proposed, that they're located near side lot lines of residential, again, within public right-of-way, but within the kind of extended easement area or extended property line area, so that it's not placed directly in front of someone's house, for example. This is new. We're kind of all learning. Cities, surrounding cities are learning as well. It's very possible as technology changes that we could be before you again to make some minor modifications here and there with our ordinance. There will be changes as well to our right-of-way ordinance. Concurrently, our Public Works Department is working on those. Those changes will go straight to City Council, as they do not need to be reviewed by Planning Commission. But we're hoping that those align again in a concurrent process. Staff does recommend approval as presented to the City Council. Certainly, if you have any questions or need any clarification, I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. I just have a quick point of clarification. As far as the poles that these will be erected on, are we trying to point these more at power poles, or, I mean, could they go up on a street light feasibly?
They can go up on really anything, any type of infrastructure or new infrastructure.
And then who, and I apologize if this was in the background, but whose discretion is that to where those would be located? And
Based off of, if it's in a residential area, our proposed code language would say you need to apply for a conditional use permit.
Okay.
And at that point, we propose some standard conditions that the applicant, the wireless carrier, would have to meet. mainly speaking to height, location, placement.
I generally don't have an issue with this if it's in an area that has more traffic, but if somebody wanted to put one on a street pole on the corner of my yard, I might have a different opinion about that. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff or any discussion points on this?
Chair, I think staff is doing as directed by the state legislature, I think, very straightforward. I'll be supporting it.
Chair, if someone were to come in tomorrow, for example, this went into effect the end of May, May 31st. So if someone were to make application, for example, tomorrow, it could basically go anywhere in residential. With this, new language sets up is conditions so that it's not, let's say directly in front of your house, that it would be, off to the side where existing cable boxes are
Near
located.
to Bradrick's house.
That's the first one. They would need to come in for a CUP
They would
though
have to
before
come
they
in.
came in, so we would have
Exactly.
some oversight on it not being gratuitous if, I can't imagine anybody that would wanna put one up would do something gratuitous, but just, we would have that leverage to say that either does or doesn't make sense in that area.
There.
Mr. Bradrick, you had a question?
Thank you, Commissioner, or Chair.
It's gonna
I was
take
just
us-
gonna make a point, the staff made, that in a residential area, after this gets past the city council, then it would require a CUP prior to someone plopping a antenna in your front yard.
Say it's mine. Okay. Is there any other questions, discussion? This is a public hearing, so I will open the public hearing. And since there is no one left, I will close the public hearing and I would stand for a motion or discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Walter.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council approval of the proposed ordinance amendments as presented.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second by Commissioner Bradrick. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. And the motion is passed. And that brings us to updates. Commissioners, do we have any updates? Commissioner Singh.
Mr. Chair, this is not an update, but I would like to record the commission's thanks and appreciation for the leadership that Commissioner Bradrick provided for us for the 2 years. I think he has done an exceptional job and has led the commission very well. And I would just want to say thank you, sir, for doing well and for making us all proud. And thanks for your service. Appreciate it.
Second that. Next planning commission meeting is, I should have wrote this down,
The 24th, July
the
24th.
24th, and then our next comp plan meeting is next Monday,
July 31st.
July 31st. So
We do have the draft for the next meeting agenda.
is there any updates from staff outside of the draft?
No.
I hope I didn't screw this up too bad tonight. Thank you, guys. I would take a motion for adjournment.
So move.
We have a
Second?
second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Thank you very much. Have a great night.